With very few exceptions, the classic series of Doctor Who had been made up of multi-part stories, with as few as 4 to as many as 10 stories in a season. Then again, season 23 is The Trial of a Time Lord, which is one story on screen, but it was considered 4 stories when released on DVD, but there's only 3 production codes. As you can see, it gets a bit confusing. And then there's Resurrection of the Daleks, which is only 2 episodes as broadcast, but it was made as 4, but then cut into 2 episodes. This is the kind of confusion that Russell T Davies wanted to avoid. He wanted to avoid showing the word part 2, so as not to have the audience come in on an episode and think, oh, I needed to see part 1. As such, most stories in the new series are single episode stories, but there are occasionally multi-part stories, and we're about to enter the first one. Doctor Who comes back down to Earth to meet the aliens of London. And then there's Sharda, which despite never having been completed has about 5 different versions, and one's an omnibus and one's in parts, and another one's in parts but it's on audio with some extra bits in animation. And Aliens of London opens with a simple yet devastating idea that Rose has only been away a few hours as far as she's concerned, but for her mother it's been a whole year. She's missed a whole year of life on planet Earth, been presumed missing, and possibly worse. Now, despite Doctor Who being a show involving time travel, the classic series hadn't really done much stories about time travel. They had done a few stories with paradoxes, but probably the closest relationship to a classic serial here would be to Mawdryn Undead, where the Doctor is in 1983 and his companions find themselves in 1977, but in the same location. But instead, the new series states up front, no, we're gonna do what would later be called wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. And it's very simply done here. The Doctor sees Rose's missing poster and runs after her because once she sees her mother, the timeline can't be changed. I mean, that's what I read into the scene anyway. You know, if the Doctor can intercept Rose before she interferes with the timeline, he can then take her back and put her on the right path. It's interesting, though, that Rose never brings up that idea to him, but I suppose we do get that discussion later in the series. I know in Rose I criticised Keith Boke's direction. I think it's better here. The performances, especially Jackie and Mickey, are a bit more reined in, a bit more subdued. From Jackie's point of view, of course, she has been worried about Rose for a year, so naturally she's a little less of her ebullient, bullish self that she was in the first episode. The scenes with Jackie and Rose in the flat, especially with Jackie saying, the worst thing is you won't tell me where you've been, those are really heart-wrenching, and I really have to praise Camille Coduri for that. Of course, Billie Piper is acting in the scene as well, but those scenes are Jackie's scenes, and the moment where she slaps the Doctor, it's a mission statement that this era of Doctor Who is going to deal with family. It is going to deal with the consequences of these companions traipsing off into time and space, whereas the classic series hardly if ever touched on that. This does give me a moment which gave me pause for thought back in 2005, and that is the moment where Rose calls the Doctor so gay. Now, in 2005, I remember sort of being taken aback by that, and I thought to myself, well, this is a gay writer who made his fame writing one of the seminal queer shows of television, Queer as Folk, but I have to wonder, for people watching it, especially young people who don't know the writer's pedigree and where he got his start, how did that impact them? I think it is true to character. I think someone like Rose, 19 years of age, growing up on an estate in London, would use the word gay in that vernacular, pejorative sense. But I'd be very interested to hear what you say down in the comments, especially if you are someone who was watching this show as, say, a 5 to 10-year-old. Because obviously I wasn't. I was 21, going on 22 when this came out, but I started watching Doctor Who when I was 6 years old. So I'd be interested to hear your perspective as someone who started watching Doctor Who at the same age I was, but a different Doctor Who. Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. To be honest, I find this script to be without much substance. It's all about moving people into the position they need to be in for part 2. It's not as character driven as some of the earlier episodes we've had, outside those early scenes with Rose and Jackie. Even later, when Mickey turns up and talks about the hard time he had when Rose disappeared, it's less about Mickey and more about getting immediately back to finding out more about the mystery and more about the Slitheen. I have to praise Noel Clarke as well. His performance has come down a few notches. Now again, he's had a very tough year, so that could be the actor's thinking, or it could be notes from the director and producer. Mickey gets to come inside the TARDIS, as does Jackie. Mickey contributes to the plot. Jackie runs out and basically calls the cops on the Doctor. And the Doctor and Rose get whisked off to number 10 Downing Street. Now, Mickey running away from the police, it's kind of played for laughs, but at the same time, he's told us that because of Rose's disappearance, he was the prime suspect in her murder. He says, "People thought I murdered you." And even though that's played as a joke, there's really an undercurrent of darkness to that. So when Mickey runs away, it's not just a plot function of he still needs to be free in order to serve next week's episode, but it's an understandable character action because he's not being arrested again. Rose is back. Look, I didn't kill her. It's all fine, but I'm not getting involved in this again. And it's kind of funny because Noel is still playing a little bit for laughs, but it's quite a serious situation because the laugh in that scene is more when the Doctor says, "Take me to your leader." So Keith Boak's direction still isn't quite there. He won't come back to the show after this two-parter. It might have been interesting to see if he developed had he come back, but we've just had 2 weeks of Iros Lyn, and a big thank you to one of my viewers out there who corrected my pronunciation of it's Iros Lyn, not Euros Lyn, Iros Lyn, and it's a Welsh name meaning golden. And a big thank you there to Fatumshk, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Fatumshk. Of course, at Downing Street is where the rest of the plot has been going on, and these aliens have infiltrated the government using Margaret Blaine and Joseph Green and the other guy who had a wife, a mistress, and a young farmer, which I really, really enjoy that line, and eventually General Asquith as well. General Asquith, of course, has already investigated a crashed spacecraft along with Dr. Sato. Sure, we'll never hear from her again, and discovered the Space Pig. Now, I did used to have a Space Pig action figure. I don't have a Space Pig action figure anymore, but what a great moment for Christopher Eccleston to shine as he tries to befriend the creature and then mourns not only its death, but the indignity it was put through. This is a Doctor who last week said, yeah, look, it's fine if these alien ghosts use the corpses of humankind, but to take a living creature and put it through that terror and kill it, that is what outrages him. Little point of order here, how did those soldiers not hear the TARDIS arriving? Has it got a silent mode? I'm sure that would have come in handy a lot before. We know these other three, Joseph Green, Margaret Blaine, and the guy who's been having a lot of fun on the side, are up to no good because they look at each other and they giggle and they're evil and they're farting. And a lot of people don't like the farting. I don't mind the farting so much. The farting for me is a little like Bonnie Langford as Mel screaming in the classic series. I think people remember it happening a lot more than it actually did. Now, there's also a case to be made to say that this is a story which villainises people who are overweight. But I think Russell has been very clever in including the character of General Asquith, who is a competent professional and also someone who is looking out for the country. Now, it's bravery and bravado that gets him killed, and he then becomes one of the villains. But I think by having that character, we avoid this being a story where it's just saying, if you're fat, you're evil. Now, this brings us to the meme queen of this episode, Harriet Jones, MP for Flydale North. You just love her from the second she comes on screen. She is a politician who acts the way we all want politicians to act. She has the interest of her constituency at heart, and that is filtered through wanting to do well for her mother. Now the thing is, her mother is in a care home, so anything that improves life for Harriet's mother is going to improve life for the bunch of people she lives with as well. Harriet Jones is a community-minded person. It's why she always introduces herself with her title as well as the region she represents. And despite the fact that she has several lines in and around the place, you know, that she's never really noticed, she's just a faithful backbencher. She's not one of the babes, which is a comment on then Prime Minister Tony Blair. The media had labelled a lot of Blair's female supporters and cabinet as babes, so Harriet is not one of the babes. She's just a faithful backbencher. But that's the thing. She gets in there and does the hard graft just for her constituency. That's all she's interested in. Now, she has come into this situation where there are matters of global significance happening, and she just wants to improve a nursing home. Can we get on with this? Because life goes on, as she says. Despite all the fact that this new stuff's happening, we still need to keep the wheels of the country going. And I mean, wouldn't we all want Harriet Jones as our Prime Minister or President compared to what we currently have? The Doctor is taken off for a briefing to deal with the alien threat of the crashed spaceship in the Thames. Rose goes off with Harriet, and Harriet, at the moment, is the only person who has seen the aliens. We, as the audience, haven't even seen the aliens yet. And Jackie is being interviewed by a police officer about her connection with the Doctor, and he has stomach trouble, and that's how we know that he is one of them. This gives us our first proper cliffhanger of the new series, and it's pretty satisfying. It's not perfect, but it is pretty satisfying. It's kind of the same cliffhanger happening 3 times. So Rose and Harriet discover the dead body of the Prime Minister, who is meant to be Tony Blair, but the Tony Blair look-alike that the casting agency sent looked nothing like Tony Blair, so they hide his face. And then they're menaced by Slitheen, and poor Indra Ganesh, the press secretary, gets throttled. The Doctor gets electrocuted by the Slitheen, as do all the other alien experts. Some of them are from Unit from the classic series. One of them has the name tag Muriel Frost, who was a character in the spin-off media in the 90s, and Jackie is menaced by a Slitheen in her own kitchen as well. We show all 3 situations once, and then we go for another round, while the Asquith Slitheen goes ha 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 ha, blah ha 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 ha. It's just a little bit much, and it comes back to Keith Boak's very broad direction. But as a cliffhanger, it's not bad, and you know what, I reckon if I had been a 6 or 7-year-old watching this, I wouldn't be bothered by the direction. That cliffhanger would feel massively epic, and I would want to come back for next week. Now, I'm not giving a rating out of this episode. I'll rate the story as a whole at the end of next week, so it's time for the viewer mailbag. First up, Matt writes, Aliens of London, brilliant RTD biting satire on the war on terror. It's hurt by the director, fun to watch all the same. There is that satirical element that Russell, more so now than then, is really famous for, having, recently had years and years, which I still haven't seen yet because I prefer to watch shows that aren't set in the reality I'm living in. The satire in this will become even more clear next episode, so I'll talk about it more then, because Matt's already commented on next episode saying, repeat my comment from this episode, so I will do that. Blaine Coughlin writes, the triple cliffhanger of Aliens of London was unbelievably exciting. The slow unmasking of various Slitheen, the brash atmospheric sound and lighting design, everyone's shocked faces, Jackie menaced in her own kitchen. This was the moment both eras of the program truly merged. As I was saying, I'm sure there are some people out there who find this, so exciting and can sort of look past the direction. I still find it really exciting. And what I find exciting about it is the enthusiasm everyone clearly has for the scene. Even if the direction lets it down, everyone is giving it their all, and that moment where Jackie cowers in the corner, as Nathan Bottomley has responded to Blaine here, it's a great moment, and Jackie in peril is always brilliant. I even made this meme. Cliff Chapman writes, "At the time, Aliens of London felt like the first misfire. Performances too broad, Slitheen a mixed bag of realisation, again a poor ending. Weirdly, that's grown on me since. There are Bob Holmes vibes. I remember at the time a lot of people were very disappointed by this episode, and I think a lot of that does come down to dissatisfaction with the cliffhanger, and also that for long-time fans, we were used to multi-part stories, and this was the first multi-part story we were getting. There was so much riding on it. As for the Bob Holmes vibes, you know, I see that as well, especially in part 2. I think Mickey and Jackie are a very underrated double act, which Holmes was famous for writing, but here, I think the humour between the Slitheen in their human forms is what feels really Holmesian, especially when Margaret complains about the farting. So the Slitheen, you know, take a little bit of pleasure in the farting, but it also annoys them as much as it annoys some people in the audience, and Joseph just quips, well, it feels very human to me. So Russell is kind of having his cake and eating it too. He's criticising fart humour, but at the same time saying, you lot enjoy it, you know you do. Stephen Alexander writes, Aliens of London, big, magnificent, grounds the show on Earth for better or worse, gives us an ongoing storyline, farting monsters, so much to love. Oh, what, you thought Rose leaving her family was the end of it? Nah, she has to deal with her family still. And that makes her a more understandable character. Even when you move out of home, you still see your family. And even if you're travelling around time and space, you're still a regular person, is what this is saying to you, and that means anyone can be Rose. Very Pete Lambert writes, Aliens of fart monsters? Fart monsters! I would have switched this off when I was 8 for being too cringe. They've killed Doctor Who, but it was a great 3-week run while it lasted. Hashtag RTD must go now. I can't help but think that Pete is having a little bit of a joke here. But, well, we'll see if he's still watching next week. Johnny Morris says, Aliens of London is marvellous, particularly the domestic stuff. For me, the domestic stuff is the best stuff in the episode. And even down to Rose and her family in the TARDIS, where, you know, the Doctor's like, don't make this place domestic, and Rose kind of tells the Doctor and Mickey, look, you two behave, I'm going to go deal with my mum. It marries the two worlds brilliantly. The Jixter says, Aliens of London. While this is a fun story, Big Ben getting hit, farting aliens, and plenty of Jackie action, I didn't like it as much as previous stories. Harriet Jones is great, and we also see Unit back, but I found it a bit pedestrian. Now, it's interesting, that's the second time that word's come up, pedestrian, and Stephen Alexander used it last week to describe The Unquiet Dead. It's like, just a few weeks in, we've gotten used to the speed of this show. It's so much faster than classic Doctor Who. And so when it slows down, it feels a bit weird, but I'd be leaning more towards saying this episode is a bit more pedestrian because it has these slow bits, and like I say, it's about moving everyone into position for next week. Now, this is the second half of Stephen Leader's comment, or rather the middle bit. I had to sort of cut it a bit weirdly last week. So Stephen Leader says, he loved the first 5 minutes of Aliens of London, that reveal, the domestic stuff. Very disappointed in the farting Slitheen. As I say, it's not something I have a big problem with, but I understand why people would. Particularly because I think a lot of the trouble people have with it is that for so long, and this may seem strange to fans who've only come to Doctor Who with the new series, but for so long while the series was off, Doctor Who was so looked down on, and people who didn't watch it didn't really take into account the generally high quality of writing and acting and the thought-provoking storylines, and just sort of saw it as a show with wobbly sets and stupid, childish aliens. So to then have, in this modern revival series, our first big alien race be a bunch of farting, giggling, childlike beings, I think people were worried about that public perception again. And it is interesting that while the Slitheen do recur in the Sarah Jane adventures, that is aimed at children. The Slitheen do not come back in a big way, you know, occasionally in the background, but never part of a big story in televised Doctor Who. Carson Celery says, I love Aliens of London. Has the roughness of the first production block, but the storytelling is so bold. Rose's homecoming is full of character beats that TV Who had never dared to try before, realised perfectly. I think this episode is just as important as Rose in changing how the companion is written. The plot's deceptively clever, the satire's spot on, and you know what? I like the Slovene. They made me laugh and genuinely disturbed me as a 10-year-old, so I think they did what they were supposed to do. I'm very glad to hear from you, Carson Celery, because it's easy for we older fans to kind of think that we have to take the show as an adult. But it's very important, I think, as a Doctor Who fan, to watch it a little bit as a child, and especially stories you came to as a child, they're always going to be special to you. This story is special to me because it cemented Doctor Who being back and doing big grandiose adventure. But for you as a 10-year-old, the monster scared you and you laughed. That's like me, say, watching The Candyman or The Chief Clown in the Sylvester McCoy era. They scared me and they made me laugh, and that's what you want out of a Doctor Who monster, because you need to laugh in order to get scared again. So I'm really glad to read this comment, thank you. That's all the viewer mailbag for this week. I will be back next week with my review of World War III. It's not too late to get your comments in there. If you have comments on that, Dalek, and The Long Game, please leave them in the comments under this video, as I will be recording those videos this week. Also, before then, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode of Say Something Nice, where I'm making my way through every individual episode of Doctor Who, of which there are now 830, I want to say, and saying something nice about each one of them. Until then, thank you so much for watching, keep yourself safe, and remember to wash your hands.